Hello and welcome to another motorcycling video. I'm going to talk about some quasi-legal matters and the laws in a little while under the heading of the Nanny State. So first I should be clear and say I'm not a lawyer, I have no legal training, and that nothing that I say in this video should be taken as legal advice. If you have a legal issue, you need to see a solicitor or a lawyer and get proper legal advice about your matter. Having said that, let's get straight into the topic. Now, you may have heard of the term the Nanny State. It's generally used to describe a state, in this case Australia in general, as a place that is over-governed, over-regulated. There are too many laws, too many rules, too many regulations, too many things that tell people how to live their lives and what to do. And as a general principle, just on its face, that sounds like a reasonably sensible proposition. Governments should, for the most part, let people live their lives. They should only intervene where there is a perceived problem. They should use a light touch, and they should act in a way that they think will either alleviate or solve the problem rather than just create another problem. So if the solution that they suggest is almost as bad as the problem, then it's perhaps best if they leave it to people to sort it out for themselves. That is generally an overriding principle that I think most people would agree with. We would all say that there ought to be laws to protect our children because our children are vulnerable, our children are impulsive, our children are foolish sometimes, and they certainly are open to exploitation by people who are not as who are mean-spirited towards children perhaps, or see them as an opportunity, whereas we as parents want to protect our children. The people who are opposed to the nanny, who use this term, the nanny state, would say, well, we are grown-ups, we're all mature, we're all adults, we're all responsible people, and we know what the right thing to do is. We don't need laws and rules and regulations to tell us all the time. My problem with that is that I don't think we all agree about what is the right thing to do. And even if we agree about it, we don't always do it. We know that there are, and we all agree, yes, we shouldn't murder, we shouldn't rob, we shouldn't commit acts of violence against other people, we shouldn't commit acts of sexual abuse against vulnerable people, be they women, children, or any other member of the community. And yet our courts are filled with people who do exactly that. Our police are busy investigating cases that involve that sort of situation all the time, and our jails have populations of people who've committed those sorts of crimes. So we agree, I guess, that there are laws needed to ensure that people don't murder, commit acts of violence and so on, and we agree that there are laws that we need to protect our children from the less scrupulous members of society. So first of all, agreeing what is the right thing to do isn't always as simple as it sounds, because what's the right thing for you may not be the right thing for me. Let me give you a simple example. If your child attends a school and the school has rules and says these are the things you are supposed to do, and if you don't do X, Y or Z, this is the consequence, there will be some people who will say, well, okay, that's the school rules, that's life, deal with it. If you break the rules, you understand there's a consequence and you have to accept the consequences. There will be other people who will go to the school and say, my child should not be punished because it's a stupid rule, because my child didn't do whatever it is that you say they did, even though it's clear that they did do it, or because they wouldn't be in this situation if I had done such and such, and therefore I'm the person who should be punished. Or in some cases they just say, the teacher is mean and stupid and I want the teacher to be punished, not my child. So we don't all agree on what is the right thing to do, and we certainly don't always do the right thing. One of the parts of our lives that is heavily regulated and may, for those who use the term nanny state, represent the epitome of the nanny state is in driving. And to be clear, driving is a privilege. Driving a car and having a licence is a privilege. It's not a right. The only mentions to do with transport in our constitution would be that the state governments are generally responsible for transport and the registration of vehicles and the movement of vehicles and so on. Movement within your state is a constitutional guarantee, but not necessarily movement by a car. And you earn the privilege of driving a car by reaching a certain age in the first place. We say that before you're 16 and 9 months of age, you are too young to be behind the wheel of a car, even if you're being taught by somebody else. So you need to reach a certain age. We say that when you reach that age, and you must take a competency test to see if you know enough about the road rules to be given a learner's permit, and you must then take some driving lessons, and you must complete, I think at the moment it's 120 hours in New South Wales of on-road driving as verified by a logbook before you're allowed to take a driving test. When you take the driving test, somebody will assess your performance, and if you prove to be competent enough, you'll be given a licence. But once you get the licence, there are still restrictions on your driving. When you're on what's called a Red P or a Red Provisional Licence, there are restrictions on how fast you can go. There are restrictions on how many people can be in your vehicle. There are restrictions on what time of the day you can be in your vehicle. You can't be out late at night, for example. And there are restrictions on how many people can be in the vehicle with you, as well as the types of cars that you're allowed to drive. And we say all those things because we say, well, as a provisional driver, you're not yet experienced enough to be able to do the things that are required to drive late at night, or drive with a lot of people in your car, and you're likely to be showing off because of other people in your car. And there are high-speed and powerful cars that we don't think you're ready for. Those restrictions are eased slightly when you get the next level of licence, which is called the Green P, because it has a green letter P on it. And then there is a full licence after that, and the restrictions are eased again then. But even then, when you are a fully licensed driver, there are restrictions on your driving behaviour. You must obey the speed limit, for example. And on all Australian roads, there are white signs with a red circle and a number inside it in kilometres per hour that say that's the speed limit. And that means that's the maximum speed you're allowed to drive on that particular piece of road. And most Australian roads outside of the Northern Territory, when you're outside of a built-up area, the speed limit is 110 kilometres per hour. That's the maximum speed you're allowed to go. And if you are travelling at higher than that speed, you can be fined, and you will have demerits attached to your licence. And when you reach a certain number of demerit points, you will lose your licence for a period of time. We have the restriction that says you cannot drink and drive. We've realised that a blood alcohol content of more than 0.5 impairs your judgment and makes you less capable of driving your car, therefore makes you less safe on the road, not only for yourself and your passengers, but for other people on the road. And we say that if you drive your car with a blood alcohol content of more than 0.5, you are liable to a fine and a possible suspension of your licence for a period of time. We say that there are certain drugs, illicit drugs in particular, that you may not have in your system and drive your car. And it doesn't matter whether it was in your system from something you took a week ago or 2 weeks ago or yesterday. If at the roadside saliva test that the police give you, they show the presence of any of those illicit substances, you will then be required to take a further test to substantiate the saliva test, and if it confirms the saliva test, you will be fined, you will have your licence suspended, and you will have a criminal conviction recorded against your name in most cases. And we say that because we say that the presence of these drugs, they are illegal in the first place, so there's no safe quantity of them or amount of them. We just say they're illegal drugs and you can't have them in your system. We say that in relation to driving a motor vehicle because we know that they impair your ability to drive the motor vehicle. They therefore make you less safe on the road, and they make it less safe for everybody else that's on the road when you're around. So there are penalties, as I said, which will involve criminal convictions, fines and suspension of your licence. We say that you may not use your mobile phone unless it's in a hands-free setup when you're in your car. And we say that because we know, and we know by crash evidence, that people who are using their phone to message other people or take calls or do anything at all other than concentrate on the road are distracted by the device, and that will lead to an accident. Now keep in mind when we're talking about motor vehicles that most motor vehicles weigh at least 1,000 kilograms or more, that they are capable of travelling at speeds of 100 kilometres an hour or more. They are made of steel and glass and other metals, and they carry a highly combustible fuel. And when they come into contact with other moving objects or stationary objects, the results can be from minor cosmetic damage to the vehicle and a few cuts and bruises to a person, to catastrophic injuries, to fatalities. And therefore, we want the people who are in those vehicles to be performing at their very best at all times when they're in the motor vehicle. Among the things that have been being shown to be a massive distraction in motor vehicles at the moment are infotainment screens. And I've spoken about those in previous videos, but the idea that you now have to operate many of the functions in a vehicle through some sort of screen like an iPad, or a tablet like that, means that you have to take your eyes off the road and scroll through menus and find the right icons and dig down into the menu till you find the thing you want, and then make sure you tap the right icon and make sure that the tablet has responded with the thing you want. So if you're driving along and you suddenly decide that the lane keeper assistance in your vehicle is annoying you, and you're sick and tired of hearing the beeps for the speed sign alert, and you want to turn it off, and you start searching through menus and taking your eyes off the road to make sure you're tapping the right icon and swiping the right way, and then digging down to the right menu and then tapping turn off, and it's asking, are you sure you want to do this? And you say yes. All of the time that you're going through your car, through that menu, is time that your eyes are off the road. And anytime your eyes are off the road, you present a danger to yourself because you're not concentrating on the road, but you also present a danger to other people on the road because, again, you're not concentrating on the road and you don't know what's coming towards you in the opposite direction or what's behind you or whatever, and there's going to be an accident. We have red light cameras, and even though everybody who drives a car, and even people who don't drive cars, and people who are pedestrians, they know that red means stop. We still have red light cameras because we know that there are people who are inclined to speed through those red light cameras or take a risk and say, oh, it's just turned from orange to red and I can just get across before that, and they zip across the intersection. And I couldn't give you a figure, but I'm sure there are thousands and thousands of fines handed out each year for people who go through red lights. And now let's consider the consequences of if the person who's on the opposite side of that intersection, in other words, the side where the green light is, exercises their right of way as you're tearing through the red light. If you T-bone them, there's going to be a pretty serious accident, and there could be, as I said earlier, catastrophic injuries or fatalities. We have speed cameras because although the speed limits are clearly posted and we're aware of them, sometimes we're in a hurry. We just have to get to wherever we have to get to, and we have to get there quickly. So we just ignore the speed limit and we drive so that we can get to wherever we're supposed to be. Or we're not paying sufficient attention to the instrumentation in our car, and we don't realise that although it's a 50 zone, we are doing 80. Or perhaps that information is now displayed on the tablet that's slightly to the left of you in the vehicle and you can't clearly see it. And so you don't realise, and your vehicle doesn't have a heads-up display. But we have those red speed cameras because people do speed and people do know what the right thing is to do, but don't, as I said earlier, don't always do it. We have point-to-point cameras because we say that heavy vehicles in particular, if you pass through one point-to-point camera, you should take X number of minutes or hours or whatever it is to get to the next point-to-point camera on the same highway. And if you get there before that X number of minutes, you must have exceeded the speed limit, and so you'll be fined. We also have those to allow for random checking of logbooks to see how frequently the drivers of those heavy vehicles have taken breaks and so on, because we know that fatigued drivers are more likely to be in accidents than those who are refreshed and have taken a proper break for food, recreation, refreshment, get out of the car, walk around, get out of the truck and walk around for a while. And yes, I accept that those heavy vehicle drivers are on deadlines to get from Sydney to Melbourne by X hour and then turn around and drive back again. But the safety of other people on the road is the thing that we ought to be prioritising. Now, the Nanny State people would argue, and perhaps with some justification, that all these cameras exist not so much for safety reasons, but to raise revenue. And there may be an argument for that there may be a case to say, well, the government just puts these cameras in places where they know people speed, or they know that X behaviour happens, and they'll catch as many people as they can, and they'll raise a lot of money through fines and revenue and so on. And there may be a case for that. The other side of that argument is to say, well, if the camera's there and you know it's there and you still speed or you still go through the red light camera, then I guess it says a little bit about your intelligence rather than the attitude of the government. Now, I was prompted to make this video because about a month ago, in June of 2024, I made a video to say that the New South Wales government had announced that they were going to introduce seatbelt detection cameras. Now, they weren't going to put another set of cameras out. They were just going to task the mobile phone detection cameras with also detecting if people were wearing their seatbelts, either wearing them and wearing them correctly. And the relevant Minister for Transport in New South Wales stood before the cameras and microphones of the media and told the media that in the calendar year 2023, 10,000 people in New South Wales had been fined for either failing to wear a seatbelt at all or incorrectly wearing a seatbelt. And therefore he thought this was a problem, and the problem needed to be dealt with, and it needed to be dealt with by having cameras that would issue automatic fines. Now, a day or two ago, he again stood before the assembled media, cameras and microphones and so on, and said that after 1 month of implementing these seatbelt cameras, 11,400 people had been fined for seatbelt offences. A little bit of analysis that was done by a newspaper where I read an article about this said that 11,400 people represented 0.4% of all motorists in New South Wales, and that was from something like 8.3 million vehicles that are in New South Wales at the moment. So 0.14% doesn't represent a great percentage of the population and doesn't represent, you might think, a serious problem. Although the Minister did point out that if 11,400 people were fined in 1 month, then over a calendar year that could be something like 100,000 people in New South Wales would be fined for failing to wear a seatbelt or not wearing it correctly. Now, the question of seatbelts is this. They've been in cars for something like 60 years. And the wearing of seatbelts in Australia has been mandatory for almost all of those 60 years. In fact, Victoria, I believe, was one of the first jurisdictions in the world to make the wearing of seatbelts compulsory. And yet, apparently, we still have something like 11,000 people who get in their cars and either don't put the seatbelt on at all, or if they put it on incorrectly. Now, one of the photographs that the Minister produced was of a mother who was breastfeeding her baby. Obviously, she had to take the seatbelt off in order to be able to do that, and she was in the front seat. So therefore, she wasn't restrained, and neither was the baby. Now, the issue with wearing a seatbelt correctly is as relevant as not wearing it at all, because if you're not wearing it at all, it's not going to do any good at all. And we know from all sorts of crash test dummies tests that wearing seatbelts saves lives and reduces the incidence of catastrophic injuries. The issue of not wearing it properly is if it's not across your shoulder, in other words, if you have it tucked under your arm, then it doesn't do its job. It doesn't restrain you. Modern seatbelts have a pre-tensioner in them. So what happens is when the car stops or when the car starts to decelerate, the pre-tensioner locks the seatbelt so that you're held in position against the back of the seat. In the early seatbelts, unless it was adjusted properly, the seatbelt just hung floppily over your shoulder and you still would be thrown forward until your body weight connected with the seatbelt and it restrained you. But now you have these inbuilt tensioners that as soon as the car starts to decelerate, and especially if it decelerates rapidly, the pre-tensioner locks the seatbelt and holds you in position against the back of the seat. You may well end up with some bruising and chafing of your skin from a seatbelt burn, but it's going to be a hell of a lot less than having your head go through the windscreen or your baby fly through the windscreen because your baby wasn't restrained. Now, I'm aware that in some states in America, wearing seatbelts is optional, as is wearing helmets on motorcycles, but in Australia, that option doesn't exist. it is compulsory to wear a seatbelt. And as the Minister pointed out, or the article that I read today pointed out, there is a fine of $410 and 3 demerit points are put against your licence. And it's worth noting that if you are in a vehicle and other people are not wearing their seatbelts, you as the driver are fined on behalf of each of those people. So let's imagine for an example, a scenario where you're in a 5-seater vehicle. You might even as a driver be wearing your seatbelt, but the other 4 people in the car are not wearing their seatbelts. A police officer pulls you over, or a seatbelt detection camera detects those people not wearing their seatbelts. You will be fined for each of those people $410. You will attract 3 points, demerit points for each of those people. So potentially you could exhaust all of your 12 demerit points in one go and face a licence suspension. Now, that's my understanding of the situation, and as I say, I'm not a lawyer, so it may well be worth checking that with your legal representative if you find yourself in that situation. Now, when I started this discussion, I talked about the Nanny State, and I said that there are people who say there are too many laws and rules and regulations and so on. And it may be the case that in some aspects of our lives and in some parts of our lives, there are too many rules and regulations. But I asked those who use that term, the Nanny State, to say, well, of all the situations involving driving, that is drink driving, drug driving, failure to wear a seatbelt, using a mobile phone, speeding, going through a red light camera, or any of the other things that I've mentioned in this broadcast, which ones of those would you say, well, they're unnecessary and they ought to be repealed? Which ones of those would you say are the government just interfering in my life for the sake of it? We can make the argument, as I already acknowledged, that maybe sometimes the cameras are just put there to raise revenue, and that's a different discussion. But which one of those regulations regarding the issues that I've talked about so far would you say should be repealed and we should just be allowed to do whatever we want in terms of drinking and driving, taking drugs and driving and so on? Well, that's my opinion about the Nanny State. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it interesting. If not, I hope you enjoyed the scenery, and I'll catch you when I'm making the next video.